Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Common Council of the City of Huntington for April 8th, 2025. Prior to the beginning of the business meeting, we'll have an invocation led by Reverend Chris Hayden from Central Christian Church, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance led by Christy McElhaney. Those who wish to participate at this time may rise.
Thank you for inviting me tonight. Let's pray. Lord, we just want to give you thanks, first of all, for all that you've done in our community and city. We just thank you for the many blessings that you've showered upon us and our families. Lord, we pray that you would just lead us, guide every member of this council and the leaders of our community. We pray for your anointing and your power to be upon us. Lead us in the ways that you would have us to go. We continue to thank you for all your many blessings. In the name of the Lord Jesus, I pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And with that, we'll call the business meeting to order, beginning with a roll call. Christy?
Brodigan is absent. Chapman?
Present.
Felton?
Present.
Funk? Johnson?
Here.
Pike is absent. Rensberger?
Present.
Thank you. And having established a quorum for the conducting of city business, first item on the agenda this evening is opening public hearings regarding Ordinance 5C25, 6C25, and 7C25. We will open the public hearing at this time on 5C25, which is an additional appropriation from the Motor Vehicle Highway Fund. Are there any members of the public here to address council on the matter regarding the Motor Vehicle Highway Fund? Not seeing or hearing any at this time, we will close the public hearing on Ordinance 5C25 and open the public hearing on Ordinance 6C25, an additional appropriation from the opioid settlement funds. Any members of the public here to address council regarding the opioid fund settlements? Not seeing or hearing any at this time, we will close the public hearing on Ordinance 6C25 and move to the third public hearing for Ordinance 7C25, water rates and changes. Are there any members of the public that wish to address council on the matter of water rates and changes being proposed this evening? See the gentleman here in the front row, if you would step to the podium. And if you would please state your name and address for the record. You'll have 2 to 3 minutes to address council. Council may have questions for you, but council will be mainly receiving your comments. So.
My name is Steve Fickle. I live at 348 Monroe Street. I moved here in 1994, and I went to work for the city of Huntington as their water superintendent. So I'm kind of familiar with the water treatment plant on the south side of the city that you're looking to replace, that you say is obsolete and that you need to replace it. That it's used its useful life. I was only in Huntington as a water superintendent for a little over a year, and then I went to work for the city of Fort Wayne. I retired the city of Fort Wayne about 6 years ago. But while I was there, I did a lot of projects at the water treatment plant on Spy Run. Some of the projects that I did were in the plant that was built in the 1930s. I understand that some of the reasons that you're looking to replace the plant here is you can't get parts for that, for the filters here. Well, I got parts for filters for the plant that was built in the 1930s in Fort Wayne. So you can get parts. That plant out there is not obsolete, so there's no reason to actually get rid of that plant. You can find parts for it. So as an alternative to completely replacing that plant, fix it. Might be less expensive to do that. Another alternative that you might look at that might be less expensive is connecting to the city of Fort Wayne. It's going to be half the price of the $36 million. I've talked to the officials at City of Fort Wayne, and they've done scenarios to connect to the city of Huntington for a cost of about $17 to $18 million. That's half the cost of the $36 million. Now, I realize we still need to do a rate increase, and we need good quality water here in Huntington to survive, whether it's fixing the plant out there on the south side or connecting to Fort Wayne. One or the other, we still need good quality water. We still need to have a rate increase. I'm not against the rate increase, but do a rate increase that people can afford, and I think that's what most of the citizens of Huntington would agree with me with.
Thank you, Mr. Fickle. That marks 3 minutes. Do
Thank you.
Any follow-up, wrap-up question or comments? Council members, any questions for Mr. Fickle? Thank you for being here this evening,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Fickle, and thanks for your previous service to the city of Huntington. Are there additional members of the public here to address council on the matter of water rates and changes this evening? State your name and address for the record, please, and
I'm
you'll have
John.
3 minutes.
Yeah, okay. I'm John Boyle. I live at 624 William Street here in Huntington. Something I've been wondering, moving from Lafayette to Huntington in 2020, my first month here, I thought maybe I had a leak in my water system when I saw the first bill, comparing to my bills in Lafayette, which on average were $35 to $45 a month, and then here, starting at like $85 a month or so. But then asking around, come to find out that that's just how expensive it was here. And Lafayette was dealing with some of the same things that we are here, separating the sewage overflow from going into the Wabash. So we saw rates increase a little bit there, similar to we have here already. And I'm just wondering why the cost was already a little more expensive to begin with here compared to other cities in the area. I don't know if anybody has any responses to that.
So one thing is we can look at how
Okay.
Lafayette bills, and we
Yeah.
can send you a follow-up comparison to see, but without knowing what they actually include in their bill, it's tough to answer a comparison between cities.
It's really most of the same things, I will say that. It's all, I mean, water, sewage, trash, recycling was all included. And also it was trash and recycling every week, not recycling every other week.
So I imagine then the biggest issue is going to be the difference in economies of scale because of them serving a much larger population.
It could be. I assume that that's part of it, but
Yeah.
I guess the other question that I had touched on what he was talking about, looking at the Southside plant. I don't know if there have been any investigations into what the cost would be to repair the Southside plant rather than abandon it and then build another plant right beside it, which is the current plan, if I'm correct. So those are the two things that I'm wondering.
Okay.
I think your one question on the rates is, so last year we had the rate change of sewer rate. If you look at your water bill, the first thing on it is water, the second thing is sewer, and then there's recycling, there's trash, and then there's, of course, the state taxes at the bottom, and then, what's the next thing?
And the fire hydrant?
The fire hydrant, yeah.
Yeah.
But the sewage is probably, at least mine is double what the water is. So the water isn't as high, but the sewer is really high, and the reason that is because of previous administrations blowing off what they were supposed to do with the whole Tipton Street pipe thing.
Yeah, that, yeah.
We had to do that. If we didn't do that, we were gonna be fined thousands of dollars daily from was it state or federal?
State.
State. So that one we had to vote for that. So one of the reasons why your rate's high is because of the sewer.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, and it was a similar thing in Lafayette. We saw rate hikes too, due to the same reason, but. Yeah, I was just wondering why they were already higher to begin with than Lafayette. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boyle. Any other members of the public here to address City Council on the matter? Welcome. Please state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3
Sharon
minutes.
Bartram at 2165 Green Meadow Lane here in Huntington. I understand there's things that have to be done, and they've already took a rate increase to get those sewage things done. When is it going to stop? You can't take money from people that can't afford it. I mean, there's single mothers out there that are barely eking by now, and then they raise that, and it's just going to get worse. They just can't. It's like we're expected to tighten our belts and suck it up and deal with what we can deal with. But where's the government tightening their belts? I don't see the city tightening their belts. I see people out having dinners in restaurants that are all on the clock and having meetings and stuff, and we're paying for all of that. They can cut that stuff out and have a meeting right up here in this room. They don't have to spend money and waste money like that. There is so much government waste that they could really cut back on if you just take the time to look. Then we wouldn't have to keep forking over more and more money. And once we do, it never goes back down. The taxes never go back down. They just stay the same. And all the water won't come back down. We pay over $100 a month for our water, and it's just my husband and I living there, and we really conserve water, electricity, and everything to try to bring our bills down, and we're still paying over $100 a month. And I don't think we probably even use the minimum amount of water that they charge for. That's all I had to say. I just would like to see some cutbacks on the government side.
If I may, Sharon,
Sure.
just to clarify, what we're discussing this evening is a rate increase for the utility.
Mm-hmm.
The utility is not part of the tax base.
I understand
It's a
that.
separate thing. So,
I'm clumping it all together.
yeah,
I know.
I agree. Government, there's a lot of discussion in Indianapolis right now about tightening belts, along with in Washington, D.C., so all that's happening. But here, looking at this rate increase, this is for water. My wife and I brought our water bills, and you're right, my water bill's around $100 a month. And would I like to not have to consider a rate increase? And I would.
I know.
But at the same time, I think there's a responsibility to make sure that we have water and that we have a good supply of water.
I'm sure there's places that the water company could cut back too.
Well,
Water district doesn't have to build that new building.
well, we're talking about that, and we've looked at the options. Are we going to hear more about that this evening, Mr. Mayor? I know at our initial discussion at our last meeting, they did an analysis of repairing the facility we had or building a new facility, and it was about the same amount of money. So given it being roughly the same money or even less to build a new one, it seemed a better part of valor just to go ahead and build the
And
new
how
one.
much did they have to pay for that study to determine that?
I'm not sure.
Bunches of money.
Well, I'm not going to spend money without knowing where I'm sticking my head into. I don't want
I
it locked
know.
off. So I don't,
So Councilman Chapman, since this is the public hearing portion,
Oh, yes.
we're going to we have Anthony from Lockmuller here to address the project and talk through those elements
All right.
later on the agenda. But I
Thank
do want to
you
make
very
sure
much.
we give you your time, Mrs. Martin.
yes, Sharon, we want to answer your questions.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Any other members of the public here to address council on the matter of water rates and changes this evening? Welcome. Please state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. Aaron Carl, 1365 Park Hill Drive. Some of the stuff I have questions on, and it's just basically mostly for my own curiosity. I'm assuming it was Lockmuller who reviewed the plant and made all the suggestions. Are they also the ones that are preparing the plans to fix it, to build the new one? Sometimes it seems a little self-sufficient. I'm also a civil engineer and land surveyor. I work on projects like this all the time. One of the things too I looked at is what you posted on the 4,000 gallons per house is typical for single family. Typically when we're doing our design, we do our designs at 310 gallons a day, which is closer to 9,300 gallons a month, which is closer to what my family uses. I have a family of 6. So what I'm looking at here is it's going to be more than double the rate that you guys posted. And any families more than just a husband and a wife are going to be seeing that. So what you've got on there is completely realistic on what each house is going to be spending to take care of the rate changes. You mentioned that the filters in different parts inside the building you can't get parts for. Is there ways to update those rather than tear everything down and rebuild? Because there's a lot of pretty crafty people in our neighborhood that could actually help out with this. I would actually volunteer my services to help and look at things to see what I could do to help as well. How many other items other than the filters are they having issues with? I know that was the only thing that was mentioned. The other thing that was in the article that was posted was lead service lines. Do you guys know roughly how many service lines there are that are in the city that are lead? And then I know that the wells of some of the older wells that are under my family's farm have not been working. And I think that you guys are already working on plans for that, but you got to have the wells. I didn't know if you had any answers to the other questions that I had.
Your last question, Mr. Carl, was regarding the wells at the Carl farm, the Carl well field. And can you repeat that question again?
There was no question with it. I just know that we've been
Okay.
working with being able to update all.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other members of the public here to address council on the matter of 7C25 water rates and changes this evening? Not seeing or hearing any further public comment, we'll close the public hearing on ordinance 7C25 and continue along on the agenda with the minutes of the previous meeting of March 25th. Is there a motion to bring those minutes to the floor for consideration and adoption as submitted?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and second. Further discussion and consideration of the minutes? Not seeing or hearing any at this time, we'll call the question in favor of adoption of the minutes. Christie?
Chapman?
Yes.
Felton?
Yes.
Funk? Johnson?
Yes.
Rensberger?
Yes.
Thank you. Moving along to reports from committees, boards, or commissions. Charlie?
I have nothing this evening, thank you.
PJ?
I have nothing done it.
Todd?
HQ'd. 2025 is off to a good start. We have 6 projects that are being completed, representing approximately $25 million in private investments. The 18-year impact, the agency has now facilitated 196 projects investing over $840 million during Mark's tenure with the agency. The buildings at 1600 River Fork Drive and 325 Houndstein Road, which is the home I retailed, were recently leased. And then there's 3 more buildings that are marketable. There are 7 prospects considering the River Fork West Industrial Park. A new monument sign was installed at River Fork West Industrial Park on Progress Drive. Culp and Company CPAs reviewed the agency's 2024 financials. No adjusting entries were required. The electrical, we actually did 2 studies. One was the water, which is funny we're talking about this. We had because a lot of when we bring in new businesses into town, a lot of it depends on if we can supply enough water or supply enough electricity for them to run whatever business they're bringing in. So we wanted to make sure that we could give them a sheet that says how our water is and how our electricity is. So the last meeting 2 months ago, we talked about the water, and at that time, the gentleman who presented the wells, I forget his, Anthony, he was talking about Huntington's good with the water as far as the supply we have right now. The wells are working well, and we have enough for new businesses to come in. And then the electrical capacity report from BCS management was completed and distributed to board members. The agency has now completed both in electrical, that's like I said before. So we have electricity. There's a few big businesses that we can't supply enough electricity for them to come in, just because of our grid. But we're still set up for the medium to semi-large businesses. We have enough electricity to support them. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Todd. Andrew?
Nothing.
Dave? Okay. Emma, anything for that Viking thing at the high school?
Yeah, so that Viking thing, right now we're currently working on the business management part of our project. We're working on how to make all of our ideas come to life, but in a logical way. We're doing that through looking at things like budget and how we can still adhere to that and try to stick to a good budget, but provide the community with good quality things. We're hoping to go site-see at the park that we're wanting to install both of our structures at, just to see where it is exactly that we see those structures going, which if you don't know what structures we're installing, or you might forget, we're hoping to install both a 9 square and Gaga ball pit at the park just for the community to use. So yeah, it's going really well. We're just working on putting things together to hopefully present to council sometime soon.
Thank you. Any petitions or comments from citizens this evening?
Nothing, thank you.
Okay. And I don't see Eric Long here, so we'll get his update another evening. Under old business this evening, we do have Director of Operations Annette Carroll and Water Distribution Superintendent Nate Getz here with us this evening. Previously, council had asked about leak detection and other efforts the city takes to deal with unaccounted for water or unbilled water. So Annette and Nate have prepared a report and update for council on the matter.
So Annette Carroll, Director of Operations, good evening. Following the introduction of a proposed water rate increase at the last council meeting, the council raised questions regarding the city's management of its non-revenued water, or NRW. This evening, I, City Utility Superintendent Nate Getz, and Director of Engineering Adam Cuttress will address these questions. The American Water Association, or AWWA, recommends using the term non-revenue water, or NRW, versus unaccounted for water to describe water that is lost or not billed within a distribution system, encompassing both real and apparent losses. Along with real and apparent losses, NRW includes unbilled authorization consumption, which is water that is used for authorized purposes like firefighting and system flushing, but is not billed. So what are real and apparent losses? Real losses, physical losses from leaks in pipes, tanks, and other infrastructure. What are apparent losses? Losses due to inaccurate meter reading, unauthorized connections, and theft of water. So how has the city addressed the non-revenue water? Since 2014, the city has conducted annual meter testing, which includes assessment of meters at both water plants. The city implemented a leak detection program that began in 2014 by dividing the city into thirds for annual assessments. In 2024, this program expanded to cover half the city annually. A bulk water fill station was installed at the end of 2024 and became operational in January of 2025. We expect to see the benefits of this station in the coming months, especially with the onset of construction season. A water meter has been installed at the fire station training center, replacing the previous system that relied on fire departments' reporting of estimated water use. This new meter will provide the utilities with accurate and consistent data on water consumption. So looking forward, what do we intend to do? Continue performing annual audits of the water distribution system to identify leaks and inefficiencies and promptly repair any leaks identified during these audits. Continue ongoing testing of large meters and address any identified issues effectively. Replace 5/8 meters that have exceeded their lifespan and adopt a more proactive approach for future replacements. Develop a comprehensive master plan for the water system to identify aging infrastructure within the city that requires replacement. So in conclusion, non-revenue water is not immediately visible and can often go undetected unless it becomes evident at the surface. The water may be flowing into a storm drain system or saturating a lawn. The city is committed to addressing non-revenue water and has implemented proactive measures to conserve this vital resource, reduce costs, and promote sustainability within our community. Water is an essential resource that impacts all aspects of our lives, including drinking water, sanitation, agriculture, and industry. As our population continues to grow, so does the demand for this critical resource. At this time, I'm going to pass it over to City Utility Superintendent Nate Getz, and he can answer like the technical questions that you may have on the leaks and the lead lines and the meters. As well as Director Cuttress is available as well to answer any questions specifically related to water projects that we have going on.
Nate, why don't you tell us a little bit about the work we do with leak detection?
Like Annette mentioned, we used to do a third of the city a year. Starting last year, we were doing half of the city. Again, this year we're doing half of the city. Last year, Amy Simpson detected 26 leaks, one being a mainline leak, one being a main valve leak, and 24 fire hydrants. 11 of those fire hydrants required replacement. The rest of them we were able to repair or get to shut off. Amy Simpson also performed the large meter testing. They tested 47 meters last year, 5 which failed and were repaired to be back in compliance, or I believe they have to be 97% recommended. Here recently, we dove into our smaller meters, the 5/8 meters, which you would find at a residence. And what we found is, on average, they're around 14 years old. Some are 16, 17 years old. AWWA recommends to replace around the 10-year mark. They just slow down. They're out of warranty. They only last so long. We've started replacing those, or some of those. This year, we're scheduled to replace 350 5/8 meters. We have tested 29 meters here recently that we have pulled, and what we're finding is the low flow has been failing, or average. So we had, out of the 29, we had 5 that showed no usage, and the other 24 averaged around 93%. So the low sides have been failing. The medium and high flow has been passing. So, anybody that has a little leak or just cracks their faucet open, it's not being registered accurately. So we're seeing some water loss there. So we're diving into it more, trying to see if there's any other ways we can do better and try to correct some of this.
Thank you, Nate. Any questions by council members?
So that day to day, unless somebody calls or we see it surfacing, I pretty much just have to be able to see it. But Emmy Simpson comes into town once a year and performs leak detection. So they do half of the city a year, and they have a listening device. They drop on all the valves and all the fire hydrants, and they listen for noise. And so if they hear a noise, they correlate that area, pinpoint a leak, and then at that point we dig it up and repair it. So they do search for leaks. It's once a year, and they do half of the city. But yeah, you can't catch everything. You're not going to pick up a drip or a. Yeah,
Non-billable water. Yes.
Non-revenue water.
I have a question. So basically, that was about 17% of the 29.5, 17% were defective, correct? On the meters you just,
Out of the 29.
how many low value meters do we have? Or is that what most of them are around town?
The residential meters, we have somewhere around 5,000, 5,500 residential meters. So.
What's the plan to get to all those, to check them? Or are you checking them by age? The older ones first, right?
Yeah, so
Okay.
we got a list from the billing department, and we prioritized them by age, and we're working on the oldest ones first. Like I said, we have some that are 17, 18 years old, down to 10, 12 years old. So
Okay.
we're prioritizing by age. And we're selecting random ones as we pull them to test them and see what we're averaging as far as test results go.
Okay. So we were told last meeting that right now Huntington is at 39% non-revenue water. Thank you. And we asked the gentleman who's the water expert what would be a good amount, reasonably, not, you're not going to have zero because things are going to happen all the time. And he said 19 to 20%. So do you have any plans, or I don't know if you were told this or not, so you might not have plans, but what would be your strategy to, because one of my problems is if we have 40% of non-revenue water and we should be at 19, I'd like to see us get closer to 19 before we lay a bunch of money on a bunch of people. So what would be your strategy to get that down closer to 19, or are you already implementing that now?
Yeah, so the meters is part of that. So we spoke with Emmy Simpson, which is the company that does our leak detection and meter testing, and they recommended diving into the meters due to their age. And so the large meters, we do get tested, so they may be older, but we test them. The large meters that have a high consumption, we test yearly. So as long as those are testing within range, we keep those in place. But trying to dive into the meters, I'm diving into the paperwork to understand it better. Work with F&V to come up with the water loss numbers. So myself, billing, and F&V have been working together to make sure everything's recorded how it should be.
Yeah.
And
So you have real numbers to work with, right? Yeah.
I'm diving into it more here recently. Yeah, the meters we're gonna try to test and/or I'm gonna figure out how many exactly we have and try to come up with a plan to replace them over the next so many years, whatever we can afford to.
Okay, thanks.
With lead service lines being part of this massive project, do we see more leaks with lead service lines than we do modern?
Not necessarily.
No?
There-
Okay. I didn't know if there was a, combination right there.
I guess maybe a little bit. I mean, just because of their age, and if they are leaking, it's typically at the fitting where it's just because it's so soft, it's wore through. But I wouldn't say a drastic amount.
I think one thing to add to that is we actually would hope that it does leak on the residential side because that is after a meter, so it gets detected faster. So they usually get caught quicker and they can get repaired faster so that we don't end up with a large amount of water loss. So having it leak on a service line is actually a lot easier to catch because with the meter system that we have, it'll trigger that there's a leak. That flags in water billing, and then we can notify the customer that there's a leak. And then those usually get caught and remedied much quicker, so there's a much less non-revenued water going through that situation.
So currently, we don't have a meter replacement program. You're just replacing the oldest meters.
Yeah, it's something we're gonna implement. In the past, we never had a meter replacement program. Something we need to do, and
And to clarify on that, in the past, it's just been a big lump sum at a time, as opposed to a steady rolling wave over the lifespan across the entire system. And that's the plan that we're working on implementing, so we can have a SMART goal approach to achieving those objectives and outcomes. Further questions for Nate, Adam, or Annette?
I do. What's our sewer bill based on? Is it based on gallons of water or the price? Because if it's based on the price, then the sewer will go up when the water goes up. I just want to make sure that's not happening.
It's based, your water is, sewage is based on your water. So you're metered for the water that's coming in. So if you use 535 cubic feet of water, that's going to equal.
So it's on the volume of water, not on the price. Okay.
Cubic feet of your usage.
Okay. That's what I want to make sure,
Yes.
because somebody said, oh yeah, if your water goes up, your sewer goes up. It's like, I need to check that, because
Okay,
if
so
we're telling
your
everybody the water
average
bill's
is
going up and then their sewer
530
goes up too, then we have a big problem.
Yes, so if you normally use 535 cubic feet of water, and next month you use 600 cubic feet of water, of course your water is going to
Right.
go up and the sewer will go up.
Right.
Correct, okay.
But if you do the same amount of water, it's your sewer bills, even though if your water goes up, if this gets through, your sewer won't go up.
You're not going to see a rate increase on the sewer.
Okay.
As long as you're using your normal average usage, sewer's going to stay the same. It's just that water rate's going to go.
Correct. The sewer rate's not changing, it's the water rate.
But I want to make sure the sewer rate wasn't based on the price of the water instead of the gallons.
Good clarification.
Yeah, otherwise it'd be a mess. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, further questions for council germane to leak detection and meter and valve replacements and repairs? Thank you, Nate, Adam, Annette.
Thank you.
Jennifer, appreciate it. Okay, moving along on new business then. First item under new business is first reading of ordinance 5C25. Christie?
Ordinance 5C25, this ordinance, if adopted, would provide additional funding to the MVH Fund Motor Equipment 2201-019-441 for $150,000.
Okay, is there a motion to bring ordinance 5C25 to the floor for consideration and approval on first reading?
So move.
Second.
We We have a motion and second. At this time, I want to invite our street superintendent, Tim Bischoff, forward to present on the equipment purchase that's being proposed.
Good evening. Just want to remind council, I believe it was last year in July, we had discussed the need to replace 3 trucks. With your blessing, we had put in a purchase proposal for these trucks because the amount of time, it's going to be in 2026 before we get them, but just keep the ball moving forward with us. We have reached out to the Indiana Bond Bank to secure a loan. We're looking to put 20% down, which would be the $150,000 to replace these trucks. There is a 1996 International Harvester with about 120,000 miles, a 2005 that has a max force engine that is very unreliable. We put about $7,000 into it recently. They have head gasket issues, air cooler issues, designed by the manufacturer at the time, and they have switched to Cummins engines now, which are very reliable. And then the final one was a 2014 hook truck. So 2 of these trucks are going to be single axle snowplow trucks. The third one is a tandem axle hook truck.
Questions or discussion by council members?
So the hook truck that will be purchased, is that going to replace the current hook truck, or will that be in addition to the current?
It'll be replacing one, a 2014 Freightliner.
Further discussion or question by council members? Not hearing any this time, we'll call the question in favor of ordinance 5C25 on first reading. Christie?
Felton,
Yes.
Funk, Johnson,
Yes.
Rensberger,
Yes.
Chapman.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Next item on the agenda under new business is first reading of ordinance 6C25. Christie?
Ordinance 6C25, this ordinance, if adopted, would provide additional funding to the opioid fund unrestricted 2256-001-900 and restricted 2257-001-900. This is for, ever since we've been giving the money for the opioid settlement to the Community Foundation for the Substance Abuse Fund, I was supposed to do an additional appropriation to give the money, and it's just an in and out, so I didn't think about that part. This will be sent to DLGF and then for approval, and it's not a tax-rated fund, so it's just it's a preliminary, or yeah, we just have to do it for bookkeeping purposes so that they can see where the money is going. And then I also provided you the quarterly report from the Community Foundation. That just came today, so I put that on your desk.
Thank you, Christie. Is there a motion for approval of ordinance 6C25 and additional appropriation?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Further discussion and consideration by council members? Not hearing any at this time, we'll call the question in favor of ordinance 6C25 on first reading. Christie?
Funk, Johnson,
Yes.
Rensberger,
Yes.
Chapman,
Yes.
Felton.
Yes.
Thank you. And Christie, is that time sensitive, or are you okay for a second reading in the next meeting?
Sure, we can wait.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is first reading of ordinance 7C25. Christie?
Ordinance 7C25, this ordinance, if adopted, would amend section 50.10 water rates, increasing the rates and charges applicable to user rates, hydrants, and fire protection system.
Is there a motion to bring 7C25 to the floor for consideration and
So
adoption?
moved. Second.
Motion and second. I want to invite Anthony Goodnight from Lockmuir at this time. He won't have as in-depth of a presentation as we had at the previous meeting, and that is available online and recorded, but do want to have him address the project and kind of give us a recap again on what's brought us here this evening. And then we also have representatives from Baker Tilly that will talk a little bit about the financial process of paying for the proposed project, should council move things forward. So, Anthony?
Good evening. Thanks for having me again. I'm going to try to address all the questions that I heard, but if I miss one, please let me know. But Anthony Goodnight, Lockmuller Group. As you remember the presentation last meeting, there's several reasons for a new water plant. It isn't just, parts and pieces. When I mentioned the fact that the old water plant, they could get parts, but they were special made parts. Backwash pump, I had mentioned that last time. I know that the filters need replaced, and they've been holding off on those. I think they did one a few years ago, but they're holding off on the other two. The building is 70 years old. It needs TLC. But bigger than that, what I want to talk about, and I know, Troy, you brought this up about this other study that we did for HQ. I appreciate bringing that up because I went back and just looked at it. One thing to remember is when we did this PER, we started this in 2020. The PER was submitted to SRF in March of 2024. So when we had the presentation, the PER was already a year old. When we looked at the water plant sizing, the sizing was based off of previous years, previous years, to figure out what that sizing was. And so when I went back and I looked at some of the calculations, in 2021, you had 5 of the highest days that you've probably ever had, okay? The highest day was 4.795, almost 4.8 million gallons a day, all right? Right now, the way it sits, your plant, firm capacity, and if you guys remember last time I was talking about it, you have peak capacity and you have firm capacity. Firm capacity is what designers design to, is what IDEM approves to. They don't approve to peak capacity because at some point something's going to break, and so you have to take your largest user out of service. So firm capacity, you had 4.75. So at that point, you were probably taking water from your towers and not replenishing. So let's say you were to have a back-to-back day, or you had a fire or something that same day, which can happen. It would have been difficult to potentially fight that, to potentially have 2 or 3 high service days back to back to back. So when I started looking at this, it really brought it home to me that, when we're talking about a new plant, we're not just talking about a plant, okay? So there's several other buildings that have to be built with this. It's not just a building for a plant. There's a raw water pump station that's out there that was put back in the 70s, back when actually it was probably built even farther back than that. They replaced it or remanned it in the 70s because of into groundwater. But it used to take water out of the river. It's a brick structure. They've had trouble with it over the years. They've put some money into it. That structure's got to be replaced. There is backwash. If you guys have been out there and seen where the backwash goes, it goes to lagoons. Those lagoons have to be maintained. So when we're talking about this, we're going to put in a new backwash system. The chlorine. Right now they use gas chlorine. A lot of plants are going away from gas chlorine. They're going to hypochlorite. So that building is separate from the water plant right now. It's in a little bitty tin building. So this would be a hypochlorite system, which is going to be similar to the north water plant, a lot safer, and it takes a bigger footprint to put that in there. So when we start talking about a plant, we're not just talking a plant. There's other things that are going into this. A septic. They have a septic system still. They're in the city. We're going to replace that, get rid of that septic, and tie them into sanitary sewer. We've got to do some water main replacement out there to make ready for the water main. So all that to say, there's a lot that goes into this. And we took, 6-8 months, and we actually looked at all of it. We cost all of it. We've got exhibits that we can show that we showed last time. So happy to do that. So when we talk about the plant and as the project, we have to think about what it's going to take to treat that type of water and to supply that water from wells, okay? Going back to that, so in 2021, you wouldn't have been able, you were barely able to survive that that top day. Since then, and in this HQ report, we looked at the last 2 years, okay? So the water usage has come down, for whatever reason, whether it's less usage, whether it's the non-revenue water has been reduced, possible. I don't know that. I mean, it's probably speculation. We could test that theory probably by looking at water loss stuff. But as part of the design process, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sit down with the city and we're going to do an analysis of 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and look at trends. Okay, and we're going to size the plant appropriate. I believe what we have in there is probably the worst case. But we're not in design. Like I said, we picked this up the first time a year ago to do the presentation. And this is the next step. I mean, this is what the city's trying to do, is get to that next step. What does this project actually look like from that perspective? So as far as the wells are concerned, right now, I think at the last meeting, I kind of reflected on it a little bit, and here's what I would tell you. We talked about the firm capacity and taking the largest producer out of service, which is actually at your north. What we have to do when we're thinking about wells and treatment is we have to almost separate the two, because you can't provide water from your north well field to your south water plant. There's no pipe that allows you to do that. So we have to think about the south well field and the north well field as two separate entities. At your south well field with, I think Mr. Carl mentioned that one of the wells was being redrilled, and I think I mentioned that last time, number 12. Right now, you're about 2.2 million gallons a day that you can provide out of that south well field. You need to be more at about 1.5 to 2 million more, okay? And that's where that 2,000 gallons comes from. We might be able to drill one and hit 2,000 gallons. I'd love that. Great. That'd be awesome. But we anticipated drilling two based on information that we had from wells 5A and well 7. One of them was 1,000 gallon a minute. One of them was 1,400 gallon a minute. So we're basing everything we have on data that we currently have. As we get data, we will refine those numbers and be able to give you a better understanding of what that looks like. I wish I could sit there and go, that's going to be a 1,000 gallon well. I can't do that. Until they drill the well, that's the only way we're going to know that information. So all this to say that, you know, there is data. The more data we have, the better the project's going to be, and that's what the next step is let's start gathering a lot more of that data, hone in on what that actually looks like, and we're all hoping that it's going to come in below the cost. I mean, that's the thing, and I mean, you guys know this, I have a vested interest in making sure Huntington gets exactly what they need and no more than that. I didn't serve 14 years.
Anthony, could you elaborate on the vested interest? Because there are some folks in the room who don't know you and your history of the community.
Right. So I worked here 14 years as Director of Public Works. I have born and raised here. I got family here. I'm not going to put a project in front of you guys that's not exactly what's going to be. Okay, that's not who I am. That's not who my firm is. That's not what I'm going to do for my own family. I can guarantee you that you're going to get the best project and the project that's the right size for this city. I know that out of my heart.
Anthony, in the PER, we look at alternatives.
We did.
What were some of the alternatives that were looked at and declined?
So we looked at, the couple of them were looking at wells that were way out south. I don't remember what the road name was, like 1,000 south or 1,100 south, south of where the current wells are. That was where Peerless Midwest was able to identify where their potential water could be. They assumed, based on other wells that were in the area, that they would be 400 gallon a minute. If we need 2,000 gallon a minute, that means that you need 5 wells at least, likely, to get that, to supply that 500 or that 2,000 gallon a minute. A well house is roughly $1 million. By the time you drill the well, you build the well house, you buy the land, you put the fence up. So there's $5 million. Got to get 2 to 3 miles, 4 miles with water main, probably $1 million a mile, $800,000 a mile for water main. I'm spitballing a little bit here, but, you know, so, you know, you might add $6, $8, $10 million to a project if we did that. Where the 2 wells are currently going to be sitting are adjacent to where they were in the past, on land that the city understands the owners. They've had agreements in the past. It should be very easy to get those agreements. Another one of the alternatives was a GWUDI alternative, which is groundwater under the direct influence of surface water. It is potentially, when you drill those 2 wells, you are going to have to do that. Because the 2 wells that were currently there, they were deemed GWUDI. So that was one of the alternatives that we looked at, and I believe it added $300,000 or $400,000 to the construction cost if they are deemed GWUDI. There is some more O&M that's related to Fleece and Vandenbrink operations to be able to manage that plant going forward. Trying to think of what the other ones were. Just a second here, guys. There's always the no action alternative. That no action alternative basically looks at what if you do nothing. And I kind of explained that already. If you do nothing, you have a bad day. You don't have any growth potential. I mean, it's possible you have a well that goes out of service. There is a risk with doing that. So you know, looking at doing nothing, that's a guaranteed in every PER that you have to do. But you have to do something. You're going to need to do something. You currently don't have the well capacity. If you hit another 4.8 million gallons a day and you have some equipment down, you might be in trouble. It is possible. You know, we did look at chlorination and disinfection alternatives to kind of go through different ways there to make sure that we were putting in the right disinfection system. It's going to be very similar to the North Plan, at least that's what we're proposing. We also did, it's not in the PER, but we did an analysis of the North Water Plant, trying to find additional well capacity up there. Right, currently, the city does not own any property up there. They do, you know, the water that Peerless has identified where it's at is a ways away from current existing utilities. And to be able to purchase the land, get that wells is one thing. But the North Water Plant, the way it's set up, there is room for an additional filter when it was built. You can take the wall out, shove a filter in there. Problem is that it's not, that one additional filter would not be enough to be able to handle not doing something at the south well field. That you wouldn't be able to get enough out of the north well field to offset what you need at the south well field. And so that alternative really wasn't looked at anymore because you really need to have both the south and the north well field operating very similar to how they are now. And I think it's evident based on the fact that when you move to the north, south well field started recharging. So you don't want to go out there and start taking water from the north where you start mining the water like they had back at the south well field. So those are some of the options that we looked at. And I believe the regionalization option was brought up by others, and I don't think it was ever looked at outside of that.
So specifically, Fort Wayne was non-responsive. We had conversations with them. They never gave us a proposal. So that you were able to get one is interesting. We can follow up and actually get that information from them.
Yeah, so, yes. So, you know, when I saw the initial cost, so 35 million, or I don't know the exact number, but it's 35, 36, 39 million, somewhere you know, that's all encompassing, right? So that's construction, that's contingency, that's design, it's inspection, it's all the soft cost, all that stuff. Yes, that cost will go up potentially. If you look at when you built the north plant, and I started doing some calculations in my head, and the north plant, I think, ranged like $6-7 million, but that was 2009. And you start doing the inflation on there and looking at the construction indexes and stuff, and the number is pretty dang close to where it is right now. So you can only assume that in another 20 years, this plant's going to be, 3 times it again, 4 times it again, whatever that ends up being, right? So yes, it's going to get more expensive every time you go down.
Further question and discussion for council members, for Anthony on the project itself?
Yeah, I have a few. So are we good with water now, or are we in trouble with water? As we stand right now?
What do you mean by in trouble? I want to maybe
Well,
understand.
we're offering to help. I want to know if one of the reasons we're doing this is because Andrews is having a water problem right now, and we offer to help supply them water. All that additional, is that why we're doing this? Because of the additional things? Or are we good, even if we have to supply Andrews, if we don't do anything? As far as water supply and that type of thing? Or, when you're talking about the towers, if one's not pumping as much as it was, what if we put another couple? I'm trying to figure out options for different ways to be less expensive than raising everybody's bills in 3 years like that. So that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, let me address the Andrews one first. So the Andrews was taken into account, and they, their highest day in 2022 was 168,000. That equates like 2% of your overall.
So we could handle Andrews if we did nothing.
I can't say that because I would need to do the calculations to see what's going on. Okay. Because you got to remember there's several things at play here. There's the well field, there's the water plant, and so some stuff may be able to handle that additional capacity, but some stuff may not be. The well field is a big concern because you have a well out of service now. If you lost another well, if you had a hot day that takes that, it's a big concern. So I could get you a better answer. But I don't know that I'm going to sit here today and be able to answer that without looking at it.
So if you had a tight budget and you didn't have the extra money from all the people, are the wells more important, or is the plant more important?
So the wells to me are the most important. However, if you drill a well and you're going to hit Gwudy, you're going to have to do something different to that plant to be able to treat that water. IDEM will not allow you to put it on until you were able to treat that water. So at that point, then the plant becomes as important as the wells become.
So the plant can't treat the additional water from the wells?
It's the Gwudy problem, the groundwater under the direct influence of surface water. So that's bacteria that gets into the water. Okay? That has to have a different treatment system than what groundwater takes. So it's a big puzzle. So if you go out south and you go get groundwater, and you can treat it with the current plant, but that's going to cost you $8 or $10 million to go way out south, and now you got 5 additional wells potentially, or 6 or 7, or however many it takes. So it's a puzzle, and how do you put that puzzle together? We believe the puzzle we put together is probably the best long-term solution.
So the new plant will be able to handle the Gwudy, the Gwudy or Grudy?
The Gwudy, it's an acronym.
Gwudy, okay.
GWUD, groundwater under the direct influence of surface water.
So the new plant can handle that?
Yes, we can put that process in.
But don't you have 2 wells that already have the Gwudy in them right now, and that's why
They
you're
are
shutting down?
not, one's been closed, the other one's not on operational.
And you can't just bring it back? Once you shut it down, it's done?
You can bring it back if you have the Gwudy treatment. You do not have that.
No, if you had the new building, would the current well work?
Yes, you could, but the problem is that well, I believe, is busted since that.
Okay.
So it actually needs to be capped. The first one was capped. The second one, I believe I had heard it was not.
Okay.
So you can't put it back in service. So in our thought is if you drill one very near there, it's likely you're going to end up with very similar water. We hope not. I mean, that's the hope, but we have to plan for it in case it does, right?
In this phase we're in is gathering information,
Gathering that
data, and
data.
testing to assert
Correct.
whether or not it will be. That will go then into informing the design.
Okay. I understand it's the informational time, but you're still asking for money, so I'm trying to, trying to not make it as much money if we can. So, what was the other one? The areas you're looking to drill, you're gonna have to probably go a decent way down to get it done. Are there a lot of other wells around there that you may lower the water table and have to fix theirs?
Yeah, that's a good question. They had that problem at the North Well Field. I would suspect, and I don't know if Annette, if you got any, or Adam, you got any more information from Peerless, but I was going to look and see how deep the other wells were. I would guess that they're going to be very similar in depth. So I doubt you're going to have that issue, but even if you do, I think.
Yeah, so to add to that, right now, the expectation would be that the new wells we would drill close to 5 and the previous wells 5 and 7 would be at a similar depth to those. Any residential wells that we impacted previous years from those well operations have already been addressed, so we wouldn't expect to see any new residential wells affected in that immediate area. That being said, if we do, under the water rights law, we as a municipal large water producer are required to make that right with that residential well. We did run into that with a lot of shallow residential wells up north. With the new North Plant going online many years ago, we still deal with it occasionally, and the city solves that problem sometimes by drilling new wells, sometimes by lowering the residential pump to back it down into the water table. There's a few customers that have actually chosen to hook up to city water because they've been near one of our water mains. So there are routes that we go on those if those are affected.
And are those really expensive to do or not? I mean, because that's gonna be additional cost after the fact of this.
Right.
Is that included into here? Or that's something that we just cover after?
That's something that typically gets handled within city operations under the water utility itself. If you have to drill a new residential well, we see those costs somewhere between $10,000 to $12,000. A lot of times we are able to just lower the pump, and those are a couple $1,000s, a new pump and the piping to do so. So if we're able to lower it, it's significantly cheaper.
So nothing really bad?
No.
Okay.
And I think one of the thoughts when we talked about doing the 2 wells down at the river where they currently exist, you've already done a lot of that. But if you go out south, put in 5 wells, you've got all these property owners that have never felt that issue. And so that was another consideration that is kind of, there was no cost put to it, but there's certainly going to be additional cost in that, with it being, and I'm not going to get into hydrology part of it, but that was discussed early on. I do remember that now that Adam mentioned it. About it would be nice to keep them there just for that simple fact. Because there's not a lot of properties that have around there.
So you, in your expert opinion, don't think that the current plant, because one of my thoughts was, instead of doing this all in one big bill and just $56 million, I was hoping that maybe we could do wells now, plant in 3 years, and try to ease up on the people that have to pay for this, because it's a lot of money. And then they want 10 more million for the lead pipes, which, according to what I found out earlier, we've been supposed to fix those since 1972. Is that correct or not correct?
No, we've not been required to replace them since 1972.
Well, that's when the bill was done, right? Or
the Clean Water Act and the lead and copper, the initial lead rule back then outlawed the use of lead pipes for the installation of new water lines. Back then, no more could be installed. The city has historically, as we find them in projects, have taken them out and replaced them with either copper or plastic, depending on what the time frame was when they were discovered. It was with the recent, and it's an outfall of a lot of the Flint water crisis and the lead service lines and the lead lines up there, that the lead and copper rule was recently redone completely. We were required to have our base level lead service line inventory completed by October of last year. We did that. We now have, I believe it's a year and a half to continue to refine that, and over the next 10 years, we're required to replace completely all lead and galvanized service lines from the main all the way to the house. And that's over the next 10 years that requirement exists, so that's why it's a heavy focus. Because we can either do nothing now with those and then have to spend all of that money in year 8, 9, and 10, or we can spread that cost out starting now and work on it over the next 10 years to keep the cost low.
Anthony, I think it would be helpful to give a recap and overview of the structure of the project.
Yeah.
You know, what are we doing right now in this first phase that requires the immediate rate increase? You know, as we've discussed and broken this up in phases with the state, and just kind of give an overview and recap of that.
Yeah, so I think to add to that, this first phase is a $9 million project. That includes the well items, drilling and replacing wells 5 and 7. It includes a lot of the piping, miscellaneous piping work, the septic system solution, and a lot of the on-site at the water plant work, while also allowing Lockmuller to perform their entire design and study of the sizing, the capacities, all of that for the new south plant. And then phase 2 of the project would be, phase 2 of the project itself, it's actually phase 3 of the funding, is the construction of the plant. So we are doing it in phases so we can methodically walk through it. So it's phase 1, the first $9 million of the project is on-site stuff and the wells and design of the plant. So we're not just running full force into a $36 million plant. We're doing it at a $9 million phase and then the remainder.
So are we voting on phase 1 today, or are we voting on the whole bill?
So what you have in terms of the water rates and changes, and I understand the language gets confusing here, but there's a 3-phase step up in the water rates over the next 3 years. The proposal today really only locks in the first 2 of those because those are the numbers we know will be needed. The third one, once we have the design and bids in hand, then we'll come back to council for the third. So that's authorized at that point because then we have a very firm estimate and number of what this is really going to cost in the final construction phase, you know, because we already have bids in hand at that point. We thought it would be better to bring it back to council on that third one once we have the bids, rather than try to overestimate to make sure you have enough.
No, thank you. That explains a lot, because I'm thinking if we get running toward the end of the projects and some of these assumptions come in our favor, we might not have to borrow as much money in the third phase.
Correct.
So it's good to know we're just really talking about the first 2 phases, and the third phase may be less than what's advertised. So hopefully we can.
I have
get
learned
those
in my
wells
life it
worked
is
out.
far better for us to under-promise and over-deliver than to over-promise and under-deliver.
Right.
So, yes, we are not leading with a hopeful picture here. We are trying to give worst-case scenarios so that we can plan for the worst and work for the best.
And I think historically, this phase has been done under a bond anticipation note. But with the financing that the city has secured through SRF, it is advantageous for you to do that first through them. I'm sure that Baker Tilly can describe it all, but that is the reason it's going down this path rather than the bond. We got to get to the design so we can start answering a lot of your questions and get to the actual analysis. Love to have you involved, and
Well, I don't know much about water. I've only had 2 weeks to learn it, so I'm just saying. But
I would encourage you guys to go out and look at the South Water Plant and go look
Yeah.
at the North Water Plant. Well fields.
Yeah, we would definitely invite anybody that wants to come look at both plants.
I'll
Show
be
you
there.
around so you can understand what the
I'd like that.
south plant actually looks like compared to the north plant.
I'd like that.
And during the conversation, it sounds as though, and thinking back to the last presentation, you're going to do away with the lagoons, right? We won't need that. And you're improving the treatment process so it's safer and less hazardous with the chlorine. So the new plant will be obviously improved over what is there. And if I recall, another advantage of the new facility is that you don't take the old one offline. Because I don't know how you'd build a new facility or remodel that facility. You'd lose that South Water Plant, and we don't have enough capacity in the north to supply the whole city. So we're almost in a situation where we need the new facility to keep the old one running while the new one's being built. I don't know, am I looking at it right?
It's possible. I mean, we would have, again, we'd have to run the numbers based on current information. So that's the biggest key is going to be is how big do you want to build this thing? How big are we going to build it for the now? And how big are we going to build it for, you know, what happens if a big industry comes in? Are you able to supply them water or are you not? So it's all the what ifs, and those are the things that the city's going to have to address at some point. We're going to have to work through the process. That's what this is.
If we have a major fire that drains down our towers and followed by another major catastrophe, can we handle two? And that's what you're talking about earlier.
We had a major fire over here and it went well. It's because things were working. What happens if one thing's not?
Touching on that as well, kind of back to what Todd said with HQ'd, our highest day you had at 4.8 million gallons. Do you remember what the average was like throughout the course of the year? What our average daily usage is?
They're lower this year than they were then.
Yes,
But that's COVID, everybody can tell
it
you.
is lower this year, and it's lower than.
Oh, it's going to
years
be,
past.
it's going to be well low. I mean, it's going to be 2 million, 3 million.
Okay, but we still need the South Wellfield being at 2.2 million gallon capacity, correct?
Right now, that's what you have.
So we need that extra 1.5 million to 2 million more.
Right, because what you got to remember, we're talking about a 16-hour runtime, okay? Not a 24-hour runtime. So when you start doing things, start doing calculations, you have to remember you got to pump all that water within that 16-hour time period, or less, because you got to have time to take it out for maintenance.
Correct.
You have to. So the numbers may look inflated based on your daily usage or your high peak demands, but it's because you have to pump it in a shorter period than 24 hours.
And with the growth of Huntington that we are witnessing with the River Fork West, with new facilities going in, residents moving into Huntington, we need to make sure we have a high capacity for day-to-day and for emergency purposes. And we can't risk one of them going bad.
Okay, further questions for Anthony at this time? He's still going to be here with us through the process, so he'll be available at a later time as well. So, thank you, Anthony.
Thank you.
I do want to invite Baker Tilly up this time to, again, just give a high-level recap of the funding plan and proposal. Ian, thanks for being here with us this evening. If you'd go ahead and reintroduce yourself to council. And
Hi, everybody. I was here last meeting. You probably saw me. Didn't do the speaking, but I'm Baker Tilly out of our Mishawaka office. So accompanied Jeff last week and actually helped put together this cost of service along with my staff on the job and kind of the behind-the-scenes guy that was able to help put this together. So bringing this kind of I know we went over that full presentation on the screen last week, but bringing this to a high-level kind of summary. So what we did in the cost of service was look at our phase one project on a engineering side of things. We have the 3 phases of rates, so not to get confused with that, and then ultimately Phase 2 project as well. So what we did in the cost of service was really a very deep dive. It's a very deep dive of a rate study to look at some usage characteristics and associated costs for your residential class, your commercial class, your industrial class, and kind of take a deep dive where those cost allocations need to end up and essentially reset rates to make sure there isn't any sort of what we like to call subsidization occurring. So what we found in Huntington's case is that a lot of the time the residents were actually subsidizing those larger users. So what we do in a cost of service is kind of reset those rates to proportionately allocate those among the user classes. So that was the big deep dive into this cost of service. So things that we took into consideration here, normal day-to-day capital costs or your normal annual capital costs, which were about $2.2 million of rate-funded capital costs. So normal operation every year. We also took into play the Phase 1 project, which was $7.5 of that SRF traditional loan funding, which is their lowest interest rate that they can provide in a very advantageous program for a project, as well as 1.5 that we were granted in a ban, essentially a forgivable ban that we're not having to pay back. So essentially 1.5 of money that we're receiving towards that project to help the spend down, which is great. So we also looked at the Phase 2 portion of this project, which we know is about a $27 million project, so lumping in the lead service line components to it, $37 million, with the lead service line components that we're building. So taking a holistic look at that and then allocating those costs among our and industrial classes. So ultimately what that told us, and as I had alluded to, was that the residential class over time had been subsidizing the industry, and that's really what we would call just over time how rates play out, and we do across the board rates, things to tend to get allocated that way where residents are paying probably a higher share of cost compared to industry. So resetting that is ultimately what we had done in our study and found. So that got us to a point of where we stand today on the Phase 1, Phase 2, and then the Phase 3 rates that are still being kind of. So brief summary of where we're at on this project and kind of how we derive some of these rates to get to that ultimate bill impact that you had all seen. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for coming this evening. Okay, so first and foremost, council, we want to acknowledge it's complicated, it's difficult, it's hard, and none of us are excited about seeing a rate increase to get this work done, but you see the diligence and the work that's gone into it and why we have a particular need where we do need to bring in outside subject matter experts to help us with the financial planning and the engineering on this. This is not something that we're equipped to do in-house, and so we do see the value and expertise in hiring these partners to help us do this. And so they are available, again, for any further follow-up questions that you may have regarding this. Todd, I know you alluded to having to do a crash course in this over the last 2 weeks, and you're exactly right. I mean, it's a lot to take in. And so as we move forward through this, again, they're going to be here to answer any of those questions from you or from the constituents we all serve, because we do want to make sure that folks understand the reasons why we're doing this and what's brought us here and what the path forward looks like for us. So, go ahead, Charlie.
One thing you were talking about the cost of service. So in this rate adjustment, there is an increase for residential, but I think that kind of got glossed over. We're realigning the cost of service so that there's not a big an impact toward residential users. Because over time, you just keep throwing a percentage increase at it, things got out of balance. So your proposal here balances it based on cost of service, which is going to bring residential users more back in line compared to industrial users.
Correct, yeah. Ultimately, there's still an increase, which is kind of where that focus goes, I know initially, but yes, through the cost of service, if we're just doing across the board, that rate increase probably looks a little bit higher for a residential class, because we're just strictly saying, hey, I think it was maybe 78% as a rough estimate across the 3 phases. Obviously, that third phase is kind of pushed off for right now, but that could have looked a lot worse on a residential bill versus realigning these rates that have kind of gone a little bit astray over the course of time and just the traditional rate process of across-the-board increases. So, I mean, you can see that in phase 1 where we kind of realign cost of service here. I know for what the state calls a normal average user, I know there's different usages among different households, but 535 cubic feet, which is 4,000 gallons, is what the state deems an average. You're looking at phase 1 about a 15% increase based on cost of service versus your industrial users, where more costs are shifting, are really bearing a lot of the brunt of that. At one large user at about almost a 200% increase and 125% increase. So certainly things, if you're doing across the board, could look quite a bit worse, but this cost of service has really shifted that cost to be collected from the users and where that actual cost on the system is incurring. So really aligning those back where they should be, essentially.
Okay, this is what I thought, I was waiting for you to ask.
Yep.
On your sheet you gave us, it says ongoing capital replacements and extensions, 2.24 million annually. Is that what it's going to take to run the new plant?
No, so that is just your normal everyday capital that we had worked with Annette and her team of developing on what we need on an ongoing basis annually on an average over the 5 years. So it would encompass multiple capital projects that aren't bond funded. So it's all just rate funded capital that are annual replacements are occurring.
Can you explain that to me in
Yeah,
simpler-
so Todd,
as a not intelligent person, could you?
No.
Water main replacement.
yeah, so the water main replacements, so even like this project right outside of City Hall right now, there's a water main component to that. And so there's, that capital would be used on projects like that. Or as we need to buy new equipment for ongoing maintenance or leak detection or Vector trucks, that's what goes into that number. That's based on our rolling capital plan.
So are those estimates, or is that a slush fund?
So those are estimates that we received from Huntington. So I say estimates, but probably the best guess estimate that you can give in
Based on the capital
2025.
projects that we've identified in the next 5 years, that's where you have that number.
So we're including that in this whole thing too? Or capital, instead of
Well, it has to be
Correct.
included.
Yeah,
'cause those
any
are-
expenses
just
that
water related?
Yeah,
just water related.
yeah, just water related, yep.
So is that the 10 million I was talking about before for the lines, for the lead service?
No, so there is a portion of lead service that is actually built into that, but that's in 28, 29, that's in excess of what we would be bonding out for. So I did want to speak to that lead service. It is certainly something that probably needs a little clearing up. It's advantageous in the fact if we can do this through a loan and amortize it over 35 years. SRF has traditionally matched with a grant, so they've on average done about $5 million a year that they'll give communities in loan funding, and half of that, so $2.5 million, is typically a forgivable ban. So $2.5 million of grant in a way, and then the other $2.5 million is at a 0% interest rate loan over the course of 35 years to ease that impact instead of having to do that all at one time.
Because I dropped out of accounting after 2 classes in college. Wouldn't that be a better option than adding 10 million to this whole thing to make it more, the rates go higher?
To cash fund, you're saying?
Instead of 10 million for lead pipes on the whole plan, which is what we were told, you're saying they would match half of it?
And that's what we're building.
That's in-
here.
That is,
Yeah,
That's already in here.
That's already in there.
correct.
That's part of the 10.
So the 10 million, half is forgivable.
That's part of that.
Okay, thank you.
And I will say that their program, it's advantageous to start early with that program because the inclination that I have received is that that program will eventually taper off because the funds won't exist. So taking advantage of the program now while they have funds available, and they'll only give you the funds that they can reasonably assume they can complete in a year or two, I believe. So that's why they designate that 5 million typically, because a lot of communities are asking that funding. But by the time 28, 29 comes around, that funding becomes potentially a null point for the grant side of the money. So taking advantage of that 2.5 million, essentially 5 million in this case, becomes advantageous to us in a rate perspective and getting some of that funding that we can do these projects.
Thank you.
Yep. I think I just want to speak to the capital portion that you were asking about, Todd, the $2.2 million or so annual expenses. When you look at some of the size of some of the water projects specifically that we've done, take for instance the South Jefferson Water Main project that the city did a few years ago. That was about a $1.3 million project, and we were only running just over 3/4 of a mile of water main or so. So it doesn't take long for the city to go through a capital fund like that when we undertake large water main replacement projects. So that fund goes towards those kinds of projects, as well as Nate buying water meters to replace water meters and any of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's, with the size of our projects, it's hard to go through funds.
Adam, real fast while you're still up here, I don't know if that gentleman's question got answered earlier on how many lead service lines are in Huntington
So
that we need to replace over the next
yeah,
handful of
I don't have the exact data in front of me. I can certainly get that number from our GIS database downstairs. I know we've identified a number of lead lines. We've identified a number of galvanized lines that are downstream of lead under the new lead and copper rule. Those have to be replaced. There are several hundred of those individually. Nate and his crews are still going around working to physically identify the water lines on locations where we don't have meter pits, because we don't have any portion of the line we can see. If we have a meter pit, we can physically look in the pit and see the kind of line it is. If it's a curb stop, we have nothing we can look at, so Nate's crews are identifying those by potholing methods, which means it takes a lot of time to identify those. I know we were at a little over 1,000 or so of not visually confirmed service lines, so we're working through those, and that's part of the refining of the data that we have to do over the next year, so that we have all of that as hard data replacement.
And we can get those figures to council, again, understanding that it's a estimated data set that we're refining and finalizing. Further questions from council members regarding the project itself or the rate phased increases being proposed? Thank you. Further discussion and consideration on ordinance 7C25 this evening. Okay, not seeing or hearing any at this time, we'll call the question on first reading of ordinance 7C25 in favor of the motions for approval. Christie?
Johnson?
No.
Rensberger?
Yes.
Chapman?
Yes.
Felton?
Yes.
Funk?
Yes.
Motion carries. Again, the second and final reading will be at the next council meeting. Next item on the agenda is first reading of ordinance 8C25. Christie?
Ordinance 8C25, an ordinance of the Common Council of the City of Huntington, Indiana, authorizing the acquisition, construction, and installation of certain improvements for the waterworks system of the City of Huntington, Indiana, the issuance of revenue bonds to provide the cost thereof, the collection, segregation, and distribution of the revenues of such system, the safeguarding of the interests of the owners of such revenue bonds and other matters connected therewith, including the issuance of notes in anticipation of such bonds, and repealing ordinances inconsistent herewith.
Is there a motion to bring ordinance 8C25 to the floor on first reading for approval and adoption this evening?
I'll move.
Second.
Motion and second. Further discussion and question, for council's sake, this is the bond ordinance that accompanies, it would be underwritten by the water rates and charges of the previous ordinance, and so these are in lockstep together with one another. Further discussion, consideration by council. Not hearing any at this time, we'll call the question in favor of approval and first reading of ordinance 8C25. Christie?
Rensberger,
Yes.
Chapman,
Yes.
Felton,
Yes.
Funk,
Yes.
Johnson,
No.
Motion carries. Second and final reading will be at the next meeting. Moving along on the agenda, we have a CF1 compliance form for Park Lofts. Christie?
Yes, there's a compliance form for CF1 for Park Lofts. They have real estate. It's a 10-year abatement back from 2015, so this is the final year of the abatement, and everything has been filed correctly and in compliance. And so I'm just asking for approval, and then Charlie will sign as president.
Is there a motion to bring the CF1 to the floor for consideration and approval?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Further discussion and consideration by council members. Not hearing any at this time, we'll call the question in favor of approval and receipt. Christie?
Chapman,
Yes.
Felton,
Yes.
Funk,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Rensberger.
Yes.
Thank you. And moving along under miscellaneous, Christie, the March 2025 budget reports and financials.
Yes, the fund reports as of March 31st are in good order. The funds for property tax revenues, general fund is $8,757,000. The MVH is $1,009,000, and restricted for MVH is $638,000. Park fund is $109,800, and airport $140,000, and landfill $74,700. We have also the CEDAT fund. We spent in March $117,785, and so year-to-date $259,299. But everything is in good order with the funds, and thank you.
Any questions for Christie on the financials of the city? Thank you, Christie. Is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Further discussion and consideration? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. And thank you to the members of the public who